So, diving into this formation phase, it's basically this part where we could think that of course there can be -3, -4, -5. That's more of a basic entrepreneurship education or entrepreneurial mindset building through more traditional education. But the -2 point really is that there is now at least some kind of motivation and drive or interest starting to emerge, wanting to look at this journey more seriously. So it's basically the earliest part where we could look at to kind of start capturing this kind of more serious, thoughtful approach. Also, we start from -2 and not from 0. Is exactly that we want to separate the pre-activities from the actual journey that starts, and to this way to be able to communicate this portion. Because in reality, majority of startup talk and guidance start more from the 0 point, and we felt that there was much more that is needed in this formation portion, because there needs to be a higher volume of activities identified, captured, or inspired to work on this part, to have enough potential companies and venture to actually then go through this journey. So in many places, it's kind of expected that there is a team, it's expected that there is already a good idea, but not so much is put on how do those actually come together. And that's why this module, and that's why this approach for the whole framework. So the formation phase is really a vital phase to pass over to start making real process. It's really most crucial phase for an opportunity for core team building. So really the founders team building. It gets harder the longer the venture goes to find core team members, specifically when we think of ownership and equity positions with meaningful ownership levels or meaningful carrying meaningful responsibility, because those go hand in hand. So the earlier the team can be built and aligned and identified, the stronger it can be, the more united it can be for the whole journey overall. So, as mentioned, a lot of support functions expect ideas already to exist instead of providing systematic approach to really find valuable problems to develop ideas from. So helping to find market problems. It's not too hard to find the bigger companies, existing companies in the marketplace. They have visibility to markets that they can even feed. Research findings can feed a lot of problems. It's not too hard to find problems worth solving, but at the same time, the other part is this whole ideation process of how to come up with ideas in a more systematic way. That these techniques and knowledge is available, and that's why we want to highlight what's available, not by us but by others, and also our perspectives into those, so that those can be more effectively applied into a venture. So to summarize the development phases framework, it gives guided focus, it gives progress measure, it gives generic milestones in addition to milestones that you may want to build yourself. It limits your amount of balls in the air that you need to be handled at any given time. And it really brings attention to many things that are hard, and therefore oftentimes actually the human natural thinking is that, well, we'll figure out those hard things later, or we'll figure out those when we have to. But a lot of these types of things that are hard stuff and only push to the future are done so because of the emotional reasons, not for target or success-based reasons. So it's really these kind of certain things are fundamental, foundational things that really should be looked at in the very beginning, to have a thoughtful process, to have a clear thinking process behind them, and really resolve and make sure certain foundational things are put in place correctly, and not just push those in the future, because those are exactly like time bombs that you just put on your own back and think that you can figure out them later. They will only get harder. So it's not that when you get further along that somehow these hard things get easier. So it's actually the counterproductive way, is that the more hard stuff you know you have that you have to figure out anyway, the earlier you figure them out, the less pain you will have in the future, the more you can focus on the growth, the more you can focus on the business, because you don't have to try revisiting these things. And also there are fundamental things that it's actually almost impossible to readjust or fix certain things, like ownership levels, like IPR issues, and some other things later in the development phase, as well as potentially find good co-founders later. So another part is that if not identifying the types of thinking and the types of basic actions or activities that you should have from the very beginning, is basically also creating this challenges to actually scale. So basically it's like growth without ability to growth is failure, and this is specifically the kind of the hidden thing inside, that even if you get the innovation right, and even if you get the product to pull you so that there's a high demand of the service and product, you still have to build the whole organization. And if you have no prior activities in that area, or if you now not have any expertise in that area, usually it may lead to decisions where, for example, a typical failure is that because then this knowledge is not embedded, this practice of learning these things that are necessary for growing an organization leads typically a hiring a person from a corporate background that has experience in running a bigger organization, but there's a big cultural conflict that usually happens between startup and agile mentality with the organizational aspect. And without the experience, it's really hard to read into what is relevant, what is risk, and what things should be considered and how. Because on one hand, there's no experience, and on the other hand, there's experience, but not startup experience either. And the people who have experience in actually growing a startup organization are very few, and oftentimes committed already to other ventures in an operative team. So that's a very typical risk item that comes by just trying to overlook these things at the early phase. So there's this story about the rabbit and the turtle, about it's not necessarily about the speed at any given point of time, but it's the overall progress and the target to the success that matters, not necessarily all the pace at every single phase. Because it's not that there would be any different amount of things to figure out, it's more and merely in what order to figure those out and what type of activities to start, and to make sure that these things are done with the balanced focus from the beginning. So 2 main segments: building service product into a business from an idea, and then on the other side, from building a team, balanced skill, commitment, or base of organization, values, cultures, agreements, business processes, and also having a roadmap on this side that is looking into how these things need to be set on any specific phase. In the support functions, it's good to kind of see where to seek support from in your own ecosystem. So in the beginning part, it's important to accumulate and consume as much of the knowledge as possible, and build your own library of knowledge that you feel is best for you, and also seek support from public services or publicly funded services that oftentimes are free or almost free for your needs. And then you can also match where you are at your own development phases to kind of when the more private side and channels and investors, money and connections start to become relevant. And then depending on the support ecosystem, startup ecosystem that you are tapped into, then these may vary depending on how actively private side is reaching out, how earlier phases they are reaching out, and what type of services, as well on the other side, how far the public services are expanding their reach on the more later phases. So the journey really begins from an entrepreneurial person or persons wanting to build a joint startup venture with or without an idea or a problem they want to solve. So it doesn't need to start with an idea. It can start from the commitment of we want to build a venture and we will find together a meaningful problem to come up with a potential innovation and idea to solve. Of course, it can also start from the kind of having arrived into an idea or a problem wanting to solve, and then starting to find people around that. The main point here is that there is no kind of one way, but it's somehow these ingredients need to start coming together, either randomly or through activities that some of the organizations are trying to put in place, like Startup Weekend, hackathons, university projects, and so forth, where these kind of ingredients are mixed and seeing if there is something coming out of that. But even more so purely from people working, for example, in an organization, knowing the industry and starting to see change happening and seeing that own organization is not following the future direction, and there is a real opportunity in the markets. So many different ways to start. What should be after this stage? So basically trying to define a perspective on the what's in the beginning and where this stage kind of ends, or what should be achieved in this stage. So really to have a committed core co-founder team with the right attitude, skills, initial resources required. So mainly in minimum, this means the core founding team with skills, with enough time to be able to continue to push the venture forward. It doesn't necessarily need to be money in these days anymore. It's basically giving up your free time and focusing on that free time to push the venture forward. But then to include aligned vision, mission, strategy, and having a rightfully balanced or calculated ownership. So this should be in place, and this should be the focus in the formation phase in the team side. There should be clear and agreed IPRs, so intellectual property rights. And we'll go into this more detail. Assigned shareholder agreement. Basically, this is a validation for the two above points. So basically, if there is no founder shareholder agreement confirming the team structure, the responsibilities, the intellectual properties, the ownership levels, then basically the validation that there is a team is missing. There should be a clear idea or set of ideas aiming for specific problem or specific market opportunity with enough potential. So there should already be clearly the at least the market and the problem identified, and perhaps even several different ideas for that, or there could be potentially even more problems or potential markets or market segments within the market that are looked at this point. But the direction should be very clear. There should be an awareness of market timing. So not necessarily that may be right or wrong, but there should be awareness to what is our market timing and how is our positioning towards the market, because that then changes the types of strategies that should be applied for market entry. And some ideas also behind how this business model and this product or service can be delivered in a scalable manner. It doesn't have to be scalable yet, but there should be a consideration and ideas on how to make this scalable. So this is basically the qualification criteria for the validation phase. So for the next phase. So basically, with this framework and this logic, it gives freedom to really focus on solving those criteria or those phases first, before needing to worry too much of the next phases. The future doesn't disappear anywhere. The markets doesn't disappear anywhere. Or if that's the case, that the market is potentially disappear, then you have to reevaluate whether your resources are going to be enough anyway. And again, money doesn't fix this, because you still need the people. You get very different types of commitment out of people if you just pay them salaries versus having true co-founders, and that impacts your ability to scale. And all of this come with also a mix of what is the experience of the leading co-founders to navigate through these setups. Another more painful way to do it is just to ignore all the guidance and information and I would say the proven practices that should be taken into account, and just trying to do it and wing it. And in very random cases, in the level of lottery ticket, you may be actually successful, but that's very unlikely, and it's not a good strategy for building success by design. But you will all definitely learn from that journey as well, and that, of course, naturally happens a lot, but that's also why the failure rates of building a ventures are so high. I'll stop here for a couple of questions, if there is any, just to make sure that that if there's or any other points to highlight before continuing further.
Until now, no. Yeah, so we can go on.
Okay. So basically, the formation phase is all about how to gear up for the journey, and then what type of things to think about. And basically, this is a combination of figuring out the ambition level, figuring out the market opportunity, the market size, and not only just thinking about how you should resolve things in the next few days or next few weeks or next few months. So while you have to focus on working and executing on things that are on the formation base, you still need to build the tools and also the path and direction for the overall journey as well. So because those are tools that you are also going to need to establishing the founding team. So the way to think about this is like it's very different to climb your local, hill that you can just, walk there and start walking up, and with enough time you are on the top, than really conquering something like Mount Everest. It's pretty much the same thing. You could just go on the bottom of the Mount Everest and start climbing that, but at some point you would have to come back because you were actually not prepared for what was ahead on that journey. So basically, this thinking on the formation phase is not only figuring out all the things that you need to be able to do to get to the base camp, but also what types of gear, what types of tools, what types of things you need to have with you for the journey along the way. So basically, this is really preparing for this journey. And with this, it's also finding the learning and understanding between the short-term activities, short-term plans versus the long-term thinking and long-term planning. So you need to have both thinking included in the activities, and even in the communication. When talking with team members or talking with others, you should always kind of know, well, this is about our long-term, this is about our vision, or this is about, and this is now on our daily stuff, this is next month thing, these are the things that we need to be doing ongoing basis, these are the things we need to achieve next year, and so forth. Because with this type of language in the communication, it easily gets mixed messages or mixed communication of what are we talking about now? Are we talking about how we are in the future, or are we talking something we are today? And that's important about the kind of very basics of gearing up and understanding this type of thinking. So basically, this is the visualization of having a vision of just moving forward and just we're gonna climb that hill versus we're gonna climb that mountain, and this is a very, very different thing. So you and your team are the ones who set your ambition level. So it may be Mount Everest, it may be your local hill, which would be more like a small business or SME, or it can be something in between, or it can be even further than a mountain. You can go for the moon, you can go for the Mars, it's up to you, but you should understand this logic and have a way of communicating this. So the analogy of how to think about the planning is really about, you can see the top of the Mount Everest, you can see where you are in context of that, you can see, depending on the weather, you can see quite clearly certain steps along the way, but in between and even on the very top, it's really hard to know in detail what is actually going on at certain level of the mountain, how the weather is going to change, what types of paths there are. There's many paths you can follow to the top, and so forth. So there's a certain amount of unknowns, and then there's a certain amount of understanding about these things, and there's certain clarity to those things that you can see much closer, but you have to kind of learn to understand and communicate in the ways of this journey. And this is very much similar how the startup journey can be considered from the founders and founding team members' perspective.